Welcome back. Here today on the beautiful campus of Florida Panhandle Technical College. Here today with Sunshine Speers from Emerald Coast Hospice. This month is Heart Awareness Month. This month contains Valentine's Day on February 14th, but it's a month that we're going to take to learn a little bit more about our heart. If you're short of breath, if you've had chest pains, certainly one you're going to want to pay attention to. If you haven't had any of those symptoms, probably even more reason when Sunshine comes back in the next segment, we're going to talk about what you can do to be more heart healthy, what you can do in the way of exercise, diet, and the things and signs and symptoms that you should probably be aware of. We'll be right back. Welcome back. As mentioned, our guest today is Sunshine Speers from Emerald Coast Hospice. We have been trying to bring you guys on a semi-regular basis. Usually every month you have a different focus, different times of the year, whether it's breast cancer awareness. This month we're talking about matters of the heart. Not only do we celebrate Valentine's Day this month, but this is National Heart Awareness Month. You are Emerald Coast Hospice. When people think hospice, we think, okay, death and dying, and you've been on the show multiple times and explained this, but still at the end of the day, we think hospice a different way than preventative. Mm-hmm. You guys have gotten a lot more holistic in your educational efforts. I think that's basically what your job is. Talk a little bit, Sunshine, about, first of all, what Emerald Coast Hospice is in broad strokes.
Okay. Well, Emerald Coast Hospice obviously is a service that we provide for patients with terminally ill diagnosis. Whether your doctor feels like, there is really not a lot of treatment options left for you, or a patient or family decides that, they want to live out whatever time it is they have left with the highest quality of life at home or sometimes in a skilled nursing facility, but basically among those that care about them and that they care about. And we're a supportive agency. We provide nurses, health aides, social workers, chaplains, volunteers, and they go in and help that patient and family through this process. And a lot of that requires education and just helping them understand what to expect. And it's a lot about being proactive versus reactive, because we know that anxiety comes along with not knowing what to expect. And when we have to react quickly to a situation and we're not prepared for it, it also increases that anxiety level. So we are, as you said, we're looking at it from a holistic perspective. We want to make sure that we're helping everybody understand what to expect when it comes to any disease process. And part of that, and part of my job, is to help people in the community understand a lot of preventative type measures and things that they can do to help live a healthier, higher quality life. Yeah,
and at the end of the day, you're trying to keep people from having to need hospice services. In a way, I mean, that's ultimately what you're doing, which is certainly a worthy cause. Let's get to this month. We're talking about heart awareness. We're talking about heart healthy. We're talking about what you shouldn't do. We've all heard those things. We tune it out. You mentioned in the pre-show, somebody gets a diagnosis from a doctor. They say, I'm going to change doctors because this guy's telling me what I don't want to hear. Talk a little bit about what it is you're doing this month to create that awareness and what Emerald Coast Hospice is telling people.
Okay. Well, it's a lot about quality of life. So, there are a lot of factors that we can't control. And there are a lot of situations where people are diagnosed with certain things, illnesses that they just can't prevent. But in order to continue to live with that disease, the best quality, we have to take ownership of our own health, and we have to make sure that we're doing all that we can do to live the best that we can. And if that's because we've already been diagnosed with a terminal illness and we need to learn measures to manage, or we need to learn things to hopefully prevent a terminal illness. But again, some of it is not preventable. So in those cases, obviously we are there. We're a supportive agency. But because of it being, American Heart Month, we do like to raise awareness and make sure that everybody understands what heart disease is, and as you said, the risk factors and the things that they can do to hopefully reduce the likelihood of getting worse, the disease progressing to a level where they don't have good quality of life.
Unfortunately, typically, this is human nature, we don't worry about certain health risks, certain diseases, certain maladies until we get them, or until somebody around us gets them. There's nothing more eye-opening than to have a family member or a friend come down with some kind of a debilitating illness. We should really start this from the very beginning. Is there as much, and this is not about Emerald Coast Hospice, but When I was a kid, they taught us about the food triangle. That has changed multiple times.
It's now called the My Plate.
Okay. So with time, they learn more, and I get that. And now we don't need as many servings of some of those foods or food groups, which actually end up causing problems. And so that's all good. That's because that's a result of experience and time and study. But how have we changed in our educational process? Are we still teaching kids in elementary school, in our public systems, all of the things that I learned, and I was in school in the 50s, a long time ago, but nonetheless, we learned certain things. I followed those rules on along. I'm pretty healthy. I've never been in the hospital except for shoulder surgery, so far so good. Mm-hmm. My parents are both 90. Some of it is genetic. Are we doing as good a job?
That's a tough one. I mean, I have kids in school, so I'm going to say that our focus probably is not as much on health and fitness as it was when I was a kid. We spent a lot more time outside, and we spent a lot more time focusing on, what we should eat. And as you said, the food pyramid, which was always a little bit confusing for some people. But I know that we are a very fast-paced world. And we have to do things for our children, and teachers and schools have to do things for our children to help them stay up with that pace. And so I do realize that the things that our children are learning are a bit different, and the time that they have spent, that they spend having physical activity is a little bit different than it was when we were kids.
Yeah, and that's as far as we'll go down that road.
Yeah.
That's a political discussion. But I think there's become more of an awareness for some of that, and just because we're test-based doesn't mean we'll always be that way. And I think there is more of a recognition of the fact that you need to teach even boys how to cook and sew at some point, because they're not going to be able to do it. Many guys get married just because they want somebody to take care of them, and some of those things. I learned how to cook in school. When I was in high school, I had a cooking class. When I was a bachelor, I could cook for myself. Back to Emerald Coast Hospice. It's interesting. You should really come on more often because there's so many things to discuss. We talked a little bit about your overall educational and awareness program, which I presume you do year-round. Obviously, there's more of a focus on it this month, but it's a year-round thing. Let's talk a little bit about signs and symptoms, diet, prevention. Where do you start?
All right. So first, I know statistics for a lot of people are a little overwhelming, but when you look at the broad perspective, 1 in 7 people in the United States die each year of heart disease of some sort.
Wow.
So those numbers, and heart disease is the number one killer globally. And so, because of that, we need to be aware of our risk factors, controllable, our genetic risk factors. Obviously, those things are not controllable. And the way I see that is, if we have these genetic risk factors that we cannot control, then we need to look at the factors we can control and try to do the best we can to control those so that our factors do not, triple. So when we're looking at hypertension or high blood pressure, you may hear your doctor refer to it as hypertension. That is the pressure that the blood puts on your vessels as it's pumping through your body. Well, that is affected obviously by smoking, obesity, or being overweight, your diet, your activity levels. And so it's important to understand that all of those things need to be looked at. We need to know, what it is we can do to reduce those factors. Hypertension. Go ahead.
Just a question. This is a wild thought, but with the advent of Cialis and Viagra and all of these male-enhancing drugs, have we had a higher rate of heart attack? Because obviously those raise your blood pressure.
Honestly, that's not something I don't know for sure.
Right,
but I do know that there are certain medications when our heart rate speeds up or has to stay at a higher rate for a period of time, over several instances or more, it does increase our risk for some sort of heart issue, obviously.
I know some of these drugs, they're in a commercial,
in a
30-second commercial, they talk 5 seconds about the good stuff and the other 25 seconds about, the side effects.
Yes. Now, I will say, as a nurse, I caution people to, make sure that we don't stop a medication because we're concerned with the side effects. Your doctor does have to look at the risk of that medication over the benefits. And if the risk of the medication outweighs the benefits, obviously that's something your doctor is going to take into consideration. But for a lot of people, they choose not to take medications that are actually helpful to them because of those side effects that they believe could possibly happen, and the likelihood of them having a stroke or heart attack or some other issue because they're not taking the medication is much higher. And those side effects are based on one instance. One person might have this and they have to list it on there.
And because of our litigious society, somebody's always wanting to sue somebody because
Absolutely.
You didn't tell me this.
Yes.
Do not operate this chainsaw in the shower. Well, if I do it and hurt myself, I'm going to sue the chainsaw manufacturer. It's happened.
Yeah.
And I can already see that this is going to be 2 segments. So before we go any further, one other element that from my perspective comes into that is if somebody is seeing multiple doctors and has multiple prescriptions from multiple sources. Many times, I personally have experienced this in my own family life. There's not enough communication between doctors' offices or the patient and the doctor. So when you go to a second doctor, for instance, and they say, "Are you taking anything else?" and you immediately say no, you forget you're taking these 3 prescriptions, maybe for something else, and then you have indicative situation there. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, it's called polypharmacy when you've got a patient who is on multiple medications and then they see multiple physicians. So it might be their primary care physician, and then they would go see a specialist like a heart doctor or a neurologist or someone like that. Or they go into the hospital and the doctor in the hospital puts them on a different medication. One of the issues we see with that is our patients don't realize that one medication might be generic named and the other is the real drug name, if you will, and it's the same medication. So when patients take those medicines home, they may be taking the same medication, which is why you're going to see those rehospitalizations, which is definitely when you see a benefit for additional support once you go home, whether some sort of agency that helps you at home. A lot of what you see with hospice is our nurses are going into these patients' homes and they're seeing these types of situations where patients are taking multiple medications and they're having compiled with the disease that they've already been diagnosed with, all these other side effects because they're not taking the medications properly. So a lot of that comes back to educating the patient and the caregiver on those medications. Also, communicating with your physician. And it's not just prescription medications, it's over-the-counter medications. Some people might believe that, it's just a vitamin. That's not necessarily the case. I even talk to my groups when I go out about adding certain things to our food, salt substitutes and such, because they do contain things like potassium. And so that can be detrimental when it comes to a person who is taking a potassium supplement already. So those things are very, very important. I would encourage everyone to make sure that you bring everything back to your primary care physician because they're kind of the hub. They're usually the ones that are going to refer you out to that specialist, and you need to always bring everything back to that primary care physician so that they can review it all and be aware of it. And then, obviously they'll consult with the specialist that may have put you on this medicine or that medicine so that you can make sure that what you're receiving is what you should be receiving and that you're not receiving too much of one medication or that one medication isn't causing problems with the other medication that maybe certain physicians don't know that you're on.
I know many times going into a doctor's office, you'll see the little old lady there with a plastic bag with all of her medications in it. That's great, but as you point out, and something I hadn't thought about, there's that non-prescriptive medication. Yeah, over-the-counter stuff. And my goodness, you go into any pharmacy and there's a boatload of that stuff. You may pick up a couple of things to treat your flu-like symptoms, and like you point out, they may have different names and you really can't tell by the packaging, but they're trying to do the same thing. Now you've overdosed, for lack of a better term. At the very least, you've blown that day because your head is scrambled. Is there any opportunity for some kind of a clearinghouse informationally, or is there some kind, you would think that computerized records would help, but many times there's not communication between doctor's offices or a hospital and a doctor's office. What's the answer to that? Is there any, other than patient awareness and family help?
Honestly, I probably not, just to continuing to educate. Part of my position is to continue to go out and teach people about that very type thing. When we're talking about heart disease and high blood pressure, one of those medications specifically in this time of year are cold medications. Cold medications, something with an antihistamine in it, cause your blood pressure to go up. And so a lot of people don't realize that. It's like, oh, it's just an over-the-counter sinus medicine. Well, it could also increase your blood pressure. I start having headaches. Well, my headaches are because I have a sinus issue. Well, in fact, it might be that you have high blood pressure because you're on sinus medicine, because you're trying to clear up some of this congestion you've got, and then you end up actually having a high blood pressure and could possibly be a stroke. So it is very serious, despite how minute it might sound or seem when you're standing there in front of this vast array of medications or vitamins, supplements, and all of these things. Unfortunately, there is no right answer on reaching the masses other than this type thing, or continuing to go out into the community and teaching and trying to encourage people to communicate better. When we go into a patient's home to admit under our services, we always ask to look at their medications. Oftentimes they'll just go, okay, here, and they'll bring you a paper. And it's like, no, it's very important that I actually see your prescription bottles and or any vitamins, anything that you take over the counter, and that includes laxatives, that includes vitamin C, a vitamin D, any of those things. Even something that you might take every once in a while, like a Claritin or a Zyrtec, because we need to see what those medications are, because they could possibly interact with those prescription medications that your physician has you on. So it's very, very important to just know that you don't necessarily have to know the right answers, but you do need to know who your resources are, and your doctor is going to be definitely one of those.
Our guest today is Sunshine Speers from Emerald Coast Hospice. When we come back, we're going to talk about what we came here for today, really, which is American Heart Month. I think, though, that what we discussed just now in this first segment is definitely worth talking about. I don't know that we can talk about it enough. If you've got an older person in your home, if you're getting older yourself, like me, this is stuff that you really should be aware of, pay attention, and while you're healthy and have no symptoms of anything, this stuff goes over your head. But when you start getting sick, when you start taking more than one prescription medicine, this stuff is very, very important. So when we come back, we're going to talk about American Heart Month and maybe some of the signs and symptoms, maybe the dietary concerns of which you should be concerned. And again, if you've got somebody older in your family, this is a segment you're probably not going to want to miss. We'll be right back.